Welcome to the online live demo of the Scinomix VX2. And the voice you're listening to currently is Nick. I am the marketing specialist for Europe, and today I will be your sort of host, co-host, you can say. I'll be in control of the video. And then our webinar will be hosted by Ryan from the US. And yeah, I think it's a good time to start, Ryan.
Okay, yeah. So hello, everybody. My name is Ryan. I am a sales and service specialist over here in the USA with NBS Scientific. And today we'll be presenting a live demo of the Scinomix VX2 tube labeler. So here's a little background on myself and Nick. And then just a little brief overview of what we'll be getting into today. So we'll go over a little of how the webinar is going to work, and then we'll get into NBS Scientific as a company. We'll get into Scinomix as a company. We'll get into the SciPrint VX2 tube labeler, its capabilities, functionality, some of the attachments that we can add on to the SciPrint VX2, and then we'll see the live demo of the VX2 actually labeling tubes. So just to give everybody a little bit of a heads up, before we start, the webinar is being recorded, so any of your colleagues or friends that weren't able to attend, we will have a recording that we can send out afterwards, so they can still be a part and view the demo. So everybody's microphone and camera is turned off, so if you do have any questions, please just send them in chat. Nick will be monitoring that and can, make or can bring those questions into the demo, and I will answer them as they come up. And if you have any other, more custom questions or personal questions, feel free to send us an email after the demo is over. So NBS Scientific, we are a distributor of laboratory products. We do have an international distribution network. As you can see, the countries below that we distribute in. We handle everything from sample collection, laboratory automation, sample and liquid prep, cell culture, media, storage, pretty much everything that you need in the life science market with sample storage and collection, we'll be able to assist in. So a little background on Scinomix. Scinomix is a US company. The products are manufactured in St. Louis, Missouri. They are focused on automated laboratory products, so they offer pretty much strictly automation products to deal with sample storage tubes. As far as labeling and capping and decapping possibilities. So they do tube labeling as well as rack labeling. So for anybody dealing with deep well plates or needing to put labels on SBS size racks, they have labeling solutions for those as well. The automation is of the highest quality. They are committed to customer service, and their equipment is very, very reliable as well for the value that you're paying. So let's get into the SciPrint VX2. So the SciPrint VX2 is a fully automated system. All you're going to need to do is physically put the tubes in or physically load the tubes into a bulk tube feeder, which we will get into. The functionality of the unit is capable of printing on a wide variety of tubes. We can get into specs on the next slide, I believe. And throughput is going to be up to 400 tubes per hour with just labeling. So what tubes can it handle? So basically anything from a 0.5 ml up to a 50 ml conical tube is going to be able to work on the VX2. It's going to be able to work with different ranges of diameter, different heights, and widths, things like that. The only thing that you'll need are custom rack adapters to be able to fit the tubes onto the deck themselves. Other than that, if you have tubes, we would just need samples of those tubes to be able to test and get you the correct rack adapter. And then from there, we can make sure that everything works good as far as tubes and labels. Label sizes are also variable depending on the size tube you want or you'd be using. You might need a larger size label. Scinomix does have a wide variety of label sizes to accommodate the tubes that you're using as well. So what racks can it handle? The SciPrint VX2 does have a 6-position work deck, so 6 SBS size racks will work on there. Or they can do one customized large rack to fit on the entire deck. So you don't have to have 6 individual racks, you can have one large rack that covers the entire deck. So if you do have racks that you're currently using, you don't want to use Scinomix's custom racks, we would just need to test those out to make sure that they're capable of working on the deck, and we can go from there. Another aspect to mention is the Honeywell racks are able to be used on here, so they don't need to be the standard format. If you are using Honeywell Type A or Type B, those are also able to be used on the VX2. Now we can get into some of the attachments that can work with the VX2. These are all also produced by Scinomix. So we have two options for a bulk tube feeder. The picture in the bottom left is our Scinomix VX2, and the picture in the top right is the Scinomix VXI. So what these help with is, instead of physically loading the tubes into a rack and putting the rack onto the deck itself, you can dump bulk tubes into these hoppers here. And how these hoppers work is they will use stairs to carry those tubes up to a rail, and then that rail will take those tubes down and present the tube inside the unit for the gripper to be able to be picked. So this is just a way of saving a little bit of extra time of loading tubes into racks. This way you can just take your tubes out of your bag, put them in the hopper, and then start labeling that way. The only difference between the two is the one in the bottom left, the VXQ, the tube will need to have a neck on it, meaning that the cap or the top of the tube will need to have a larger diameter than the tube itself so that it can slide down the rails. So tubes that have the same diameter cap and same diameter wall of the tube aren't going to be able to work on that, but they solve that problem by creating the VXI. The VXI is in the top right corner. How that works is the tubes will travel down a rail as well, but this time laying on its side. A camera will determine the orientation of the tube, either left facing or right facing. A gripper suction will go down, pick up the tube, orient it the correct way so that the cap is facing on top, present it inside the unit, the gripper will grab the tube and go ahead and continue labeling that way. So that's just if you're using, our Micronic brand of tubes that has the same diameter cap as the tube itself, you'd be able to use these tubes inside the VX2 as well by bulk feeding. And there are hoppers available to expand the size of the container itself if you need to put more tubes in at a time. So this just really helps with walkaway time. You can just continuously label tubes instead of having to stop and start runs once your deck gets filled with tubes. Other options with the VX2 are a universal gripper. So standard, the VX2 comes with a pneumatic gripper that changes out the gripper fingers for different diameter size tubes. So if you are using multiple different tubes on the VX2 with multiple different diameters, the universal gripper is a great solution for you because you don't have to change the gripper fingers out between runs. This can handle everything from a 0.5 ml micro tube all the way up to a 50 ml conical tube without having to change the grippers. If you were using the pneumatic, there's different limits for the diameter of tubes that each gripper finger can work with. So they do make gripper fingers to work with all tubes, but you would have to change them out. Changing them out is not very difficult. It's 2 screws per gripper finger for a total of 4 gripper fingers. So it's unscrewing 8 screws, putting new gripper fingers back on, and screwing those 8 screws back in. So if you're only using 1 or 2 tube types and you want to save just a little bit of money and don't mind unscrewing some screws every once in a while, the pneumatic gripper, standard gripper, is fine. Other attachments that are on the VX2 are barcode readers. So we can equip a barcode reader inside the unit. The barcode reader could be used for two different purposes. One purpose, as you can see in the picture, is scanning the 2D on the bottom of a tube, similar to our Micronic tubes. How this would work is if you were using a work list or for tube verification, the barcode scanner could read the bottom of that tube, the 2D code on the bottom of the tube, look into your work list, and then pull the label information that you want for that tube from the work list to be applied to that tube. Secondly, we can orient the barcode reader to read a 1D code on the side of the tube. So after a tube has been labeled with a 1D or a 2D code, it can read that barcode that it has labeled, verify that it can be read and that it's the right information, and then put the tube back into the rack. Lastly, we do have a peristaltic pump that can be added onto the VX2. The peristaltic pump is going to work with tubing that you would have a source bottle with the tubing inside of it, run the tubing through the peristaltic pump, and then inside of the unit. And then as the tube is being labeled, it is also being filled. So there are uncapping and recapping possibilities with the VX2. After the tube has been clamped by the roller, it can uncap the tube, hold that cap in the gripper. The tube will then be labeled, be filled with your sample, and then the cap will be put back on that same tube, and then the tube will be placed back into the rack. So it doesn't really have, capping and uncapping possibilities in the fact of, taking a cap off and putting a new cap on, but it can uncap that tube, hold that cap, and then recap with the same cap. As far as filling volumes, with the peristaltic pump, anything over 50 microliters is going to be fine as long as it's an aqueous solution. The pump does need to be calibrated, but our service technicians are happy to work with anybody to get the calibration right for your whatever liquid you're using and whatever volume you would be needing.
So Ryan, we got one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So someone's asking in the chat for the VXL. The spec sheet says that there's an air pressure requirement of 80 psi.
Yes.
What is this air pressure for?
So the air pressure is used in a few different parts of the VX2. So the deck rack itself, has airlocks on that hold the racks in place. So compressed air is used to hold the racks in place. It is also used in the roller itself. So the roller holds the tube as it's being labeled. That's compressed air. If you were using the pneumatic gripper is run off of compressed air and not electric. So you would need the compressed air for the pneumatic gripper. And then there's a few other things in the upper gantry that are run off of compressed air. If you have house air, that's great. We can use your house air. It just needs to be 80 to 90 PSI and 6 millimeter ODT tubing. If not, we do offer air compressors with the unit. We can just hook up an air hose to the air compressor and hook the hose up to your unit itself. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, let us know if that fully answered your question, Mr. Anonymous. We also got another question currently from Antoine. Does the peristaltic pump, the Sci pump, does it work independently or does it need the VX2 labeler?
It will need the VX2 tube labeler. So the Sci pump is linked to the VX2 software. So unless you're running the VX2 software, you would not be able to use the pump.
Okay. Antoine, let us know if that fully answered your question as well. Take the floor, Ryan.
Perfect. All right. So I believe that now we can go ahead and get into the live demo. So Nick, if you could go ahead and switch it over onto the video.
Yes. Yes, you're fully live now.
Fully live now? Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So just to give everybody a picture of what the VX2 looks like, we have the VX2 here. As you can see, we have 6 deck racks inside the unit using SBS size racks. We have our Sarsted 2 ml tubes here, what we'll be using for the demo. Just another few other things to go over. So the dimensions of the VX2, it is 33 inches tall by 27 inches wide by 14 inches deep. I'm sorry, I do not know the centimeter conversions off the top of my head for that, but we do have a nice flyer with those the dimensions of the unit on it. Also over here on the right hand side is where we have all of our connections. So we have our power connection, we have our air hose connection, and we have our big red button. So the unit does come with an e-stop on that kills power to the unit. In the middle of a run, whenever you hit the red button, it kills power to the unit. The only other connection that you'll need is the unit is connected via a router. So there is a Ethernet cord going from unit to router, and then from router to whatever laptop or PC you'd be running the software on. Other than that, we can go ahead and I will go ahead and get into running the unit for you.
got one more question in the
Yeah.
meantime. So does that mean that we can run the peristaltic pump with if we only use the software, or does it really actually require the full VX2?
That's a little bit tricky. Technically, you could, if you purchased a VX2 and a pump, you could use the pump independently to an extent. The fill volumes are programmed into a work list. The work list is used to label the tubes. So you would still need to label tubes, but if you had the pump outside of the VX2, you could still technically fill a specified volume of tubes outside of the unit as you're labeling tubes inside of the unit. So there's a slight workaround, but it would be kind of difficult to nail down. My suggestion would be, if you were going to be using the side pump, peristaltic pump to fill, to do it, concurrently while you're labeling tubes inside the VX2.
Clear. And can the VX2 also work with another pump than the side pump?
To my knowledge, no. The side pump is programmed to work with the VX2 software, so I do not think that there are any other pumps out on the market that are programmed or written to be able to work with the VX2 software that are able to be used with it as well.
Okay, thank you for your question. Another question would be, they recently purchased a VXL. Will it be possible to get access to the labeling software ahead of time so they can start the setup time before the unit will arrive?
I do not believe so. The label software comes with the VX software. So whenever the unit is installed into your lab, the software will be loaded onto whatever PC or laptop you're using. From there, one of our dedicated technicians will work with you to be able to, walk you through label setup, and we will be able to prepare any labels that you need ahead of time. If you did have labels that you wanted to see what they would look like or how that would work, we could always get on a video call and walk through setting up a label. We could have some presets saved that we could just save those files and those configs to be able to upload to your unit whenever you do get the software. But to my knowledge, there's not a way to be able to get the software early to be able to start setting up labels before the unit is in-house.
Cool, thank you. That was it for the questions. Please let us know if Ryan was able to answer your questions in full. I currently opened the software, Ryan.
Yeah, so we have the software up, and I'm going to go ahead and hit continue or start run here. And the unit is going to go through a homing phase, so it's going to get to the home position before it starts running and labeling tubes. All right, so now we've begun labeling tubes. If you want to go ahead and give you guys just a little bit better of a view of the labeling tubes. So if you were using a peristaltic pump, what would happen would be that whenever the clamp grabs the tube, it would uncap that tube, and then whenever it takes it back into the labeling position, it would be filling as it's labeling. So you're not adding that much time. It depends on how much volume you'd be putting into each tube. Anything over 1 ml, you're probably going to look at another maybe second or so per tube for So right now we're just labeling each tube with the same information. So we just have a label template that's set up, label each tube with the same information. If you were using a work list, you can have each tube individually labeled with their own unique information. The labels that are being applied to the tubes are very durable as well. They can hold up, or they can withstand vapor phase liquid microfluid temperatures all the way up to 100 degrees Celsius, like a hot water bath. They are chemical, solvent, and abrasion resistant. Now, it does depend on what chemicals and solvents you would be using. But if you are using something that can be a little bit nasty, you just need to look at our pre-approved list of solvents that they have tested with the labels themselves. We do recommend using the Scinomix brand of labels that are sold with the unit itself. If you do have custom labels or your own labels you'd like to use, once again, we just need samples of those to be able to test to see if they are compatible with the unit. Each rolling label with Scinomix comes with either 2,000 or 2,500 labels, and it uses thermal transfer ribbon to be able to actually label the labels.
Brian, one more question. Are we
Yeah.
looking at the universal gripper right now or the standard gripper that is attached?
This is the universal gripper that's on our unit right here. With doing demos with our demo unit, we like to be as versatile as possible to be able to show, customers whatever tube they want to use. So we upgraded ours to our universal gripper just recently. And if you were to start with pneumatic grippers, you only had one tube initially that you were using. It's fine to start with a pneumatic gripper, and we can always upgrade it to a universal gripper later on in the field if down the road you add more tubes.
Clear. I got another question about the barcodes. Can it process all the relevant barcode standards like code 128, code 39, or data matrix?
Yeah. So that was kind of just a brief overview of the unit actually labeling tubes. Now I'll get into the software, and whenever we go through label design, I can give you the list of approved barcodes that it has. I'm not sure if it will have every single approved barcode out there, but there is a good quality list of barcodes that it can print onto the labels themselves. So Nick, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing video. If you could go ahead and switch back over to the software.
Yes. We have another couple more questions.
Okay, yeah.
Can the VX2 work with 2 ml glass vials?
So glass vials can be a little bit tricky, just because of the pressure that the clamp uses to hold the tube in place while it's being labeled. So those would just be something that we would need to test. Depending on the thickness of the glass and how sturdy the tubes are, it's a possibility, but I wouldn't be able to say one way or another without testing the tubes first.
Okay. How long does the whole process take? I think that would be labeling an entire rack, for example.
Yeah, so labeling an entire rack, it all depends on how many tubes you could fit onto the deck. It is 400 tubes per hour. So with our Sarsted tubes that we have in there right now, it's going to take about 8 minutes per 48 tubes. So you can only fit 288 tubes on the deck itself, which will take about 45 minutes. If you are using 96 well tubes, you can fit almost 600 tubes on the deck rack, and you'll be able to do 600 tubes in about an hour and a half.
Cool. Are we able to import labels from an Excel sheet or CSV file quickly?
Yes. So there is a CSV file template that I'll go over. This is given to you with the software. It's very easy to fill in. All that you would need is the source position. So the source position is where you're pulling your tubes from. The destination position, which is where you're putting the tubes back into after they've been labeled, and then it gives you, the options for different fields to populate with your information. Those fields will then correlate back onto how the label is set up. So whatever you have in field 1 will be labeled in field 1 where you have it set up on your label template, and so on and so forth for field 2, field 3, field 4. And I'll get into that whenever we go over label design.
Very nice. Two more questions. One more from Steven. Why are the labware positions barcoded? Currently you see a little sticker there underneath where the rack is supposed to be.
Yeah, so there's no real need for the barcode on there. It's just for visual purposes. As you can see in there, it just says, I don't know if Brittany can show a little bit higher. So there's a barcode, but it just says rack 2, rack 4, rack 3. So it just has the number rack that it is. The barcode just reads as rack 2. So if you were using a handheld scanner to be able to have your own internal process of tracking what tubes were labeled in what position, you can do that. But as far as the software goes or actual functionality, I've never had to scan the barcode inside on the deck itself.
There. And last question from Larry, can the VXI also be used on the VXL? So that's not the VX2, but the VXL.
Yes, the VX2 and the VXI can be used with either the VX2 or the VXL. Both are fine.
Perfect. Thank you. That was it for the questions.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know what the VXL is, I know it's come up a few times. The VXL is just a larger version of the VX2. So instead of a 6-position work deck, it has a 12-position work deck. So just a little bit larger footprint and be able to fit more tubes on the deck itself.
Cool. Let us know if that answered all your questions. Let's switch to the software. Yes, the software is there.
All right, so now we're seeing the software here?
Yep, correct.
Okay. So this here is the software that we will be, that comes up whenever you start up the software. This is what you'll be looking at. We will go through all the different tabs and all the possibilities, but just to kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at now, we have an example of the label that I was putting onto the tubes over here. So this is just a visual look at what's going to be put on the tubes, and then down at the bottom we have our run steps. So this is just a brief overview of what's going to be happening during the run. So you can see we have pull tube from rack, place tube and roller, apply label, pull tube from roller, and place tube back in a rack. If you were using a bulk tube feeder, or you were placing the tubes, not back into the rack, and you were putting, going bulk to bulk and placing the tubes outside of the unit with a drop chute, this would look a little bit different. But for our purposes, these were the run steps that we followed during that run. We have rack name here. So this rack name is just the tube identifier. So I have it labeled for the part number for the rack that's being used with the Sarsted tubes. This can be, whatever is easy for the end user to be able to easily identify what tube is being used. And then we have our run parameters up here, which aren't super important to be able to determine what everything is. But for now, we will go ahead and get into setting up tubes and all the parameters that are needed to be able to add new tubes or, adjust current tubes. So if we get into rack configuration, we can see over here on the left-hand side our deck layout properties. So we have a 3x2 format over here. That's if we were going to be using SBS style racks on the VX2 with the 6 positions. We have our 6 positions here. If we were going to be using a large rack that covered the entire deck, we could do a 1x1, and we can see that it's going to give us a 1x1 format visually over here. So then from there, we need to define our rack properties. So if we are using the 48 well rack that I have for the Sarsted tubes in there, you can see that we have a 6x format. All that air pressure just came on, so it'll be a little bit loud.
1 moment, Ryan.
I'll give that about 1 second to grab the kickoff. Sorry about that.
Currently, I think there's a slight problem with your microphone.
All right, sorry about that. Can everybody still hear me?
Yeah, perfect. That's a
Okay.
lot better.
Sorry.
No
So we have the rack properties, which is a 6x8. And you can see that we're getting a visual representation of the 6x8 down here. If we were using a 96 well rack, we would easily be able to just change that into a 96 well rack, and you can see that it changes visually in the bottom of the screen here as well. So very easy to add, customize racks. You can see that we also have tube packing. So we have standard, and we have the different honeycomb formats as well to be able to work with honeycomb racks. Over here, the other settings, we have our gripper clearance. Gripper clearance is how far it's going to be moving above the tubes while it has a tube in it. In the gripper, Tube clearance is another number that is correlated with the gripper clearance. And then we have drop offset. Drop offset is how far above the rack itself it's going to hold the tube after it's being done labeled to drop it back into the rack, just so it's not slamming into the bottom of the rack, and it just gives it a nice little drop in there. So you can see we have our position set up over here. These will all be programmed, pre-programmed by manufacturing before the unit is delivered on site. So if you were to move forward with purchasing a VX2, we would need to get samples of all the tubes you would want to use on the unit. From there, manufacturing will set up the racks and set up all the positions on the tube. And then whenever it comes on site, the technician on site that's doing the install will might need to tweak these just a little bit. Whether there was, a little bit of bump during travel, just to fine tune those positions to make sure that the pick positions are perfect. So you can see that we have 3 different positions for the rack and then 1 for the roller offset. So the 3 positions that need to be taught on the deck rack are the first tube in rack 1, so the far left tube in rack 1, the last tube in rack 1, so the bottom right tube in rack 1, and then the last tube in rack 6, so the bottom right tube in rack 6. From there, all the other information you've already inputted, it will be able to determine where all the other positions are for rack 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So pretty quick and easy setup for 3 positions to be able to know where all the other 200 plus tubes are on the deck. We also have the roller offset position. This is the position that it's going to be placing the tube into the roller to be labeled. Once you have those 4 positions set, you are now ready to label. You can also see over here on the right-hand side, we have tube properties. Tube properties are the physical dimensions of the tube itself. So there is a nice preset list of a lot of different tubes, and if you are using a custom tube that isn't in this list, no worries. We can just use a starter tube out of the library and then make the adjustments as needed to the cap, the tube, the diameter, things like that, to be able to tell the unit exactly what tube is working with. From there, we also have universal gripper properties, so we can change the grip force so that we're not gripping the tube too tight, or we can grip it tighter if needed. 50% is kind of the sweet spot for not too tight, but not too loose either. Then we have the grip diameter, which correlates with the actual physical tube properties of the unit itself. And then if we were uncapping or recapping, there are uncap and recap properties to be able to remove the cap, hold on to that cap, and then recap the tube with that cap. And then once you have edited a run or edited a rack, all those racks are saved. So you don't need to continue to edit racks. You don't need to worry about, I just edited that rack, I need to add another one. We have a few presets in here of tubes that we've used previously on this unit. Those are all saved so that we can easily just go ahead and select a rack each time we need to do a run. Adding new tubes is very simple as well. We can just hit new, or if we have a tube that is very similar to a tube that we're currently using, we can just hit copy, and then we can make slight adjustments as needed to be able to copy that run to work with a slightly different tube. So that's setting up our racks. After setting up our racks, we need to set up our labels. So label stock is telling the unit exactly what size label is going to be used during a run. So Scinomix has all of their labels already pre-programmed into here. So there's just a part number on the inside roll of the labels that we would need to make sure matches with what is on the labels with what we are running. It has all the properties of the physical properties of the labels down here. So you don't need to do any filling in or measuring yourself. They're already pre-saved and programmed in there. Once we have our label stock determined, we can go into label documents and actually design our label. So the first thing we want to make sure is that our stock definition is matching the stock that's on the unit, and then we can go ahead and edit our label itself. This is also something that once a label is created, you can save it so that you can easily go back to it, that template, and edit, adjust slightly that template instead of starting fresh every single time. So this is the label that we have on there currently. It is very easy to add and remove fields, and it's drag and drop software, so very user friendly. So we can go ahead and add sample text. I can move everything around to fit that text in there. From there, if we wanted to have fixed text, it's going to be applied to every single label itself. All we would need to do is just type it in here. And then from there, we can adjust the font of the unit. We can adjust the size of the unit, make it larger or smaller. We can bold, italic, and underline that information. And then you can also see that we have a barcode on this label itself. So with the barcodes, all that we would need to do is, instead of display it as a text, we would need to display it as a barcode. This is just fixed text right now for a barcode. And you can see that we have the barcode style as code 128. There are a few other options here. So we do have code 39, we do have data matrix and QR codes. If you do have other barcodes that you would need, we would just need you to let us know what those are, and we can see if that's possible to be programmed onto the software. With the barcodes, we can adjust those sizes to make them bigger, smaller, easily able to be read. We can also change the orientation of any of the text or barcodes on the label itself. So if we wanted to have it horizontally or vertically, easily able to be changed as well. You can also type in the positions if you want things to be perfectly aligned. We can have everything perfectly aligned so that they all line up nice and easy, or nice and even with the other lines of text. You can see that right now we just have current date. There are a lot of different formats on here for whatever you would need to format your date. And this will just put whatever date is on your computer will be applied to the label as you're doing that. But now let's say we wanted to not label each tube with the same information. We wanted to label each tube with its own unique information. We can easily do that. Let me see if I can not have that pulled up real quick. So let me pull up an example real quick. Sorry, everybody.
Quick question in the meantime,
Yeah.
while you look it up. Stephen says right here that he discussed with you or with Wes that the 2R, the 6R, and 10R glass files should work with the VX2. Can we guarantee that the pressure of the gripper doesn't damage the files?
So we can adjust the pressure of the gripper.
Okay.
So once again, it'll just be kind of testing and finding out what the best grip force would be to not damage the vials. We can decrease and increase to find the sweet spot so it doesn't damage the vials, but it's still able to grip the vials enough to be able to be labeled.
Clear.
So it takes just a little bit more of a back and forth testing to determine what the best value would be.
Yeah, you can also, if you want to be really sure, send us a sample of your labware, and we'll be able to help and test together with Scinomix and together with our colleagues to see if your labware truly fits the system and doesn't damage it. Another question would be, the software will have to be installed on a computer. Is the computer included with the VX2, or does it need to be provided by the customer?
Yeah, it would need to be provided by the customer. If that's not an option, I'm sure that we can look into adding a computer to the quote and getting a computer for you. But typically, yes, the customer would supply the computer that the software is going on.
And does the software require a high-end spec computer, or what sort of specs does the computer require?
The specs for the computer here, I do have the operating specs. So system requirements here are going to be Windows 7, 8.1, 10, with 4.5.1 framework. This actually might be even a little bit outdated. I think that Windows 11 is also fine to run the software.
Cool. So it doesn't really require a high-end computer, or can just run on a laptop.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, we run our software on a $300 laptop here.
Cool. That was it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I will go ahead and get into how we would label each tube with their own unique information. So as you can see, this is a example of the template of the CSV file that is used to label each tube with their own unique information. So as you can see, we have destination rack, destination position, source rack, and source position. So what this means is we are pulling from source rack 1, position A1, and we are placing it back into rack 1, A1. So this is just picking a tube from rack 1, A1 and placing it back into rack 1, A1. If we wanted to place it into a different position, all we would need to do is just adjust the destination rack and destination position to the new position that we wanted to put the tube into. Over here, we have dispense volume and factory barcode. So if we were using the sci pump, we could put in our dispense volume here to be able to tell the sci pump how much volume we needed to dispense into each tube. And then if we were using, let's say, for example, a 2D barcode like a micronic tube, we could scan the factory barcode, and then we would have two options: scanning the factory barcode to ensure that this was the tube that was in position 1 or rack 1, A1, or number 2, we could pull the label information from this factory barcode. So whatever 2D barcode is in there, if we wanted to make sure that the information following that barcode got labeled onto there, we would have the factory barcode here, select label with factory barcode information, and then the information following the factory barcode over here would be put onto this tube. And kind of the source position really doesn't matter at that point. It would be looking for the factory barcode after it's got scanned, find the factory barcode, and label with the information following. You can see that we have field 1, field 2, field 3, field 4, and so on all the way to field 10. So this is how we are going to orient our label document information. So for example, if we wanted to have the information in field 1 put onto this label, we would just need to go to, instead of have fixed text, we'd go to file data, and then we would just select field 1. And whatever's in field 1 is going to appear in this location on the label itself. If we wanted to go ahead and add all 4 fields that we have on our work list example, we can go ahead and just add field 1. We can now add field 2. We can add field 3, and we can add field 4. And then with that, we can also change the size of the information that's going to be put on there. And then let's say we didn't want it oriented as text, but we wanted it oriented as a barcode. Also very easy to do. We just need to have field 1, instead of displayed as text, just have it displayed as a barcode. And we're still pulling from file data, and then select what barcode we wanted to have it formatted as. So now, if we're looking at this barcode here, this is field 1, field 2, field 3, field 4. If we go back to our work list, we can see in field 1, we have this information will be displayed as a barcode, code 128. Field 2 would get a different letter identifier. Field 3 would get a different number identifier. And field 4 would also get a different sample identifier. So this is just...
Question while we're here. Say if we want to skip a couple of tubes that are not labeled, do we just delete those rows in the spreadsheet, or?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, if you wanted to work off of a work list, but you only wanted to, pick certain tubes, all you would need to do is we could just delete, position or tube A2 from rack 1, just delete that. It'll skip right over it and go from the tube A1 to tube A3. However you have it formatted is how it'll work. So let's say instead of starting with A1, we started with tube C8. It would just start with positions or tube C8 and then follow the work list from there.
And then one more question. What happens if you accidentally label a tube that is already labeled? Does the system track the tube status?
So if you're working off of a work list, that is not possible unless you've already put a tube in there that has a label on it. It will not label the same tube twice, just because it's only able to, during a run, pick one tube from one spot, label that tube, and put it back into the spot. So unless there was another error previously, which it would inform you about, you won't be able to label a tube twice. Now, if you did have a tube that already had a label on there, it will not. So you started a new run, you had pre-labeled tubes on the unit itself, and you started a new run. It would still go ahead and place a new label on top of that. There's no way for it to be able to detect that a label is already on that tube. But having two labels on one tube isn't going to cause you any issues. If you get any more than that, it might increase the thickness of the tube itself. So fitting in and out of the rack might be a little bit tighter.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So now that we have our label design, we have our work list set up, we will now go in how to set up the run and bring our rack that we designed, our label that we designed, and the work list that we designed into the run itself. So we can go ahead and save that. So we're starting a run. All we need to do is go to edit, and that will edit the current run that we have. We do have a bunch of different saved runs. So once you create a run that you like with the tube that you're using and the label template that you're using, you can just go ahead and save that. So the run steps and all the information is saved, and you just have to go ahead and click on whatever run that you want to do. If you want to edit a current run to, let's say, just change the label on it or change the tubes that you're using on it, all you need to go ahead and do is hit edit. And then from hitting edit, we get a different tab with source, actions, and run end. So as you can see, we have tube source. This is just telling the unit where it's picking the tube from. So either it's picking the tube from the rack, or if you're using a VXI or a VXQ, we would need to have bulk feeder selected. I don't have a VXI or VXQ, so bulk feeder is grayed out. It's not an option for me. Once we have the tube source selected, we need to go and tell the unit what rack it's working with. So under our rack configuration, we have all of our rack configuration saved. So we just need to select what tube we will be using during the run. For our purposes, we're going to be using the SAR step tubes here. Next, we have our source run order. So we can either select the run order, which is what I did previously, of manually selecting the tubes that I wanted to run. If we were using a work list, we would need to select a work list and then upload a work list down here. So if we were going to go ahead and upload a work list, we could go ahead and pull a work list real quick. And then after we have a work list selected, we need to go ahead and check to see that we have it good to go at the bottom. So our work list is located here. Our work list selection is up here in source run order. And then let's just go ahead and re-click that so we can see what a warning looks like. So we have a warning here. So it's telling you something's not right. Take a look at what you've done for source and see what needs to be adjusted. So we have warning, work list is used, but user selection is also required. So we can see we have user rack selection. So if we're working off a work list, the user does not need to select anything. We're just going to be working off of the work list. So we can go ahead and uncheck that, and you can see we get a good to go down here. So now we can go ahead and move on to the next tab, which is actions. This is going to be telling the unit exactly what it's going to be doing during a run. So we have our label data source. So we have label document and from data file. Label document is going to be pulling information like we have over here on a label document of the exact same information on each tube. If we wanted to pull information from a data file, we need to go ahead and select from data file. You can see that we're getting from data files in red here, and we have a warning from data file selected, but all label fields are static. So this label that I set up isn't pulling information from any field. So we would need to go ahead and change our label to the label that we just designed previously of the barcode and the 4 fields over here. Now that it knows it's pulling from a data file, it has a label that has information oriented on it to pull from a data file. We get the good to go down here. Next, we're going to be going into run end. So run end, our options are to place the tube back in the rack, or we can place the tube into a drop chute. So the drop chute is if we wanted to not place tubes back into the rack, we wanted to place tubes into a bin or a bag outside of the unit, we can have a drop chute that goes inside of the unit. It's basically just a rail chute that sits inside the unit. We can drop the tubes in there, and then it'll take the tubes outside of the unit into whatever container you're putting those into. Besides place in rack, the other thing that we need to look at is destination location. So if we're picking the tube from a location and putting it back into that location that we picked from, we need to have it return to source. If we're putting the tube into a new location and we have that specified in our destination file, we need to select destination by data file. So whatever format you're using, we just need to make sure that we either have return to source or return to a new destination by the data file. And then you can see we also have the good to go down here. And our work list does carry over through all 3. So this work list is the same in source, same in actions, and the same in run end. After we have everything set up, we need to check our alarms and behaviors. So alarms and behaviors are what it's going to give you an alarm on. By alarm, I mean it's going to beep at you. If we have low air pressure, if you open a door, if you want it to beep whenever the run is complete, to give you the walkaway time, you're doing other things in the lab, the run is finished, it'll give you a beep, or alarm on air. So if there's any air during the run, you can have it give you a beep on that as well. And then run behavior, I always like to make sure that I have these 2 checked. That's forced home on the start of the run. So this is just going to make the unit go through the homing procedure before it starts each run. And then also auto resume on door close. So the door close is also another example of the e-stop on the unit. So if you open the door in the middle of a run, the unit will stop where it's at automatically. And then if you go ahead and close the door again, it'll just go ahead and resume instead of having to prompt the user to hit continue run. So just whatever preference you have for run behavior, we can, kind of mix and match with what the unit's capable of. Then we can go ahead and hit save. And now our run is saved. My label isn't exactly great on there, but we can go ahead and take a look at the next steps here. So if we hit next, we get a layout of the deck itself. Right now, everything's grayed out for me. I can't select everything because we're working off of a work list and I unchecked user rack selection. So I'm unable to select anything because I do not have that selected. But if I go ahead and hit next here, it's going to give me my pre-run summary. It's going to give me destination and source data. So tube destination, place tube back in source locations, print data, label tubes by looking up source location in file. And then we have our file over here of where we're pulling our information from. So if I go ahead and hit OK, it'll give me system processing. So let's see, errors found in import. Oh, so I cannot have that file open while I run the system. So now if I hit cancel, if I hit next, if I hit OK, now we are good. So we have no errors on there. We can see that the number of samples to run is going to be 48. We're putting tubes back in the source positions. We're replacing tubes in source locations. Just kind of another pre-run summary of what you're going to get during the run itself. We can hit OK, and we can see that now it auto-populates the amount of tubes that we're going to be labeling during a run. So if you had more tubes in your work list, more of the racks would be filled with the green circles. Green circles are tubes yet to be labeled. Yellow circles are tubes that have already been labeled. And red circles are tubes that have errored. If the tube is pink, you will see that it is in processing. So it's the current tube that's being labeled. Then if we go ahead and hit run, we can get an example of the information that's pulling from our work list. We can see that this information is going to be a barcode. This was our A, this was our 1, and this was the sample ID that I had thrown together. The other information that is important to pay attention to is margins and heat. So margins is just how the information is going to be applied to the label. So if it's a little bit to the left, if you need to raise it a little bit up, if you need to put it a little bit down, we can adjust these margins so that that label information is going to be centered on your label. Heat settings, this goes from 0 to 20. So 10 is right in the middle. It's kind of the sweet spot of not printing too hot to have any consequence on the integrity of the label itself, but to get you the clearest and the crispest information on the label itself. I always like to go ahead and prime the label. If we hit prime labeler here, it'll go ahead and print out an example of what the label will look like. If you're happy with that, go ahead and hit continue run. And it will go ahead and continue to run from there. I already have tubes that have been labeled in that spot, so I'm not going to go ahead and hit continue run there. But that's how you would go through the process of setting up and starting a run. Like I said, in the beginning, it's a little bit, it can be a little bit much to learn the process and get everything set up. But once you're set up, it's as simple as putting racks in the system, selecting the run that you want to do, uploading your work list, and starting the run.
Great. So we got already a couple questions in.
Yeah.
The software, about the security of the software, is the software password protected?
It can be. So the user management is offered with this. So there's two options: without user management and with user management. Without user management, anybody can go ahead and click on the software, open it up, and have free reign of the software itself. If you get user management, each person will have their own unique individual login to the software. So if they try to start the software up, they'll be prompted with a login screen. They'll log in with a username and password. And then from there, you can give people different permissions. So you can have, a super user. A super user will have access to everything. So they can come in here, they can edit rack definitions, they can edit label documents. They can change the device configuration by, telling it has a scanner, or telling it has a bulk tube feeder, things like that. They have free reign of the system. You can give users specific permissions though as well. So you can give someone just user permissions, and then from there you can say, okay, they can go ahead and they can edit a run, but they can't change anything under the rack. They can edit a run to be able to add different racks, but they can't change anything in the rack. They can edit the run to be able to add different labels, but they can't edit any labels. So yes, there is different capabilities to limit permissions of users on the system.
Okay, that answered two questions in one in one go.
Perfect.
One more question: can the list also be used with an XLSM file? So that's Excel with macro instead of a CSV.
No, it would need to be converted into a CSV file to work with the software.
Okay, clear. And what happens if we have more than one tabulation in the Excel file?
Can you explain a little bit more about what that would be? I'm not sure I understand that
I
question.
think that's more than one table in the Excel file that we're trying to import. But
so if
yeah.
you close that up, of course. So if you were to have more information on here than what the template is already set up for, it'll give you an error whenever you go to start the run. The Excel file does need to be formatted in this format with destination rack, destination position, source rack, and source position. You can have more fields over here. It doesn't matter the amount of fields that you have. That's not an issue. But if you're have more racks then it has in the system itself, it won't process. So even if, let's say, we have selected, we have our SARSTED tubes selected, which are a 6x8 format, which means that we have A1 through A8 down to F1 through F8. If we put, rack 1 F9 in there and 1 F9 in there, it's going to know, okay, your work list is telling me that there's a tube in rack 1 F9 position F9, but I know from the rack that you selected that that's not a possibility. It'll give you an error and tell you to go back and look at your work list.
Okay. So yeah, Arnaud, let us know if that answered your question as well. One more question would be, what if the data that is in a single table is too long?
So we do recommend kind of doing a trial run. So for example, if you have, a barcode that's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 digits or, pieces of information long, we recommend kind of doing a test run of seeing if the barcode can handle that size, and it's clearly able to be, read with whatever barcode standard that you're using. So it's kind of just more testing out what works. If you have examples of things that you would like to put on there in a barcode, or just information of amount of text in general, you can send that over to us. We can give you the what would work best. But yeah, it's kind of just playing around with what you see on the template itself over here is what it's going to look like on the label itself. So if we go back to a better one, we can see this information, how we see it on here is how it's going to look on the label itself. So if we change this to, something larger, we can see that it's going to be too big for the label, and it won't be the entire information won't be printed. With barcodes, if the barcodes are too big, the printer will give you an error. So if we have a barcode that's too big, as you can see, it covers up, it goes past the edges of the label itself. The printer itself will give you an error saying, barcode too big, can't be printed. And then you'll just have to go back through and adjust the settings of that barcode to be able to get it into a good spot where it fits perfectly on the label.
Cool. And you can also import images, right?
Yes. So we do have, as you can see over here, display as, and we either have text, barcode, or image. So if you were to select image, you can go ahead and just select a logo. We have our NBS logo here. So now we can just drag and drop this logo anywhere onto the label itself. The only limitations with logos or information is it is going to be black and white. Colored options are not something that are available. If you needed color, the only option that we have is to get pre-printed labels. So Scinomix could pre-print information on there in color for you, and then you could load those labels onto the system, and then from there add black and white information onto the pre-printed labels.
Very cool. We also have a question about the price, but Arnaud, I think we're going to send you a nice price overview of the product in your personal email.
Yeah. The sales reps in your country can definitely get you quotes over for whatever configuration you were looking for, a VX2 with a bulk tube feeder, a pump, or things like that.
Okay, and then one more last question. Are we able to label two kinds of tubes in the same run? Say, for example, 1 milliliter versus 2 milliliter tubes?
Unfortunately not. The only way you'd be able to label two different sizes of tubes is if they have the exact same shell of a tube. So for everybody that's familiar with a SARSTED tube, SARSTED has the 0.5 ml and the 2 ml tubes that are the exact same outer shape of a tube. Just the inner design is different. That is fine, but if the tubes have different physical properties, you won't be able to label both in the same run. You'd need to do one run of one tube, stop that run, start a new run with a different tube.
Very clear. That's it for all the questions. I think then we can go back to the presentation, the last bit.
So thank you everybody for joining the live demo of the VX2. If I haven't answered any of your questions or you'd like to see a more personalized demo with specific tubes, specific label information, specific process, please feel free to let us know and we can set that up. And Nick, I'll let you kind of explain what this is.
Yeah, so for everyone who has signed up with their discount voucher, your voucher will be sent to your email, and then we'll be able to, you'll be able to use the voucher whenever you purchase the device or any of the attachments for it.
And then for everybody that is joining from different countries, please feel free to grab a little bit of the contact information from your respective country to be able to know who to reach out to, or feel free to email Nick and he can point you in the right direction.
Very good. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for listening, and have a great afternoon or morning still.
Yeah, evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you're joining us from. So yeah, thank you very much, and everybody have a great day.